And welcome back, Mindsetters. Hope you had a nice little break. You went and did whatever you had to do. You answered the phone, you spoke to mom, you spoke to your brother, whatever you had to do now needs to stop because you guys need to pay attention. But on that note, Mindsetters also want to say make sure you get on the page, get chatting to us, let us know what you're thinking. If you're lost in you, if you need help, if you have any questions that you need answered, make sure you post them on the question. But on the other note, also for you guys to win these awesome prizes, make sure that you guys post up on the page. And it doesn't mean just saying hi or just answering the questions. If you have any interesting facts or any interesting information or diagrams that could help out other mindsetters, feel free to post. That's why the page is there. It's a forum for you guys to talk to each other, share ideas, and mindsetters, it's for you. But on that note, this is where I hand over to Bruce, who's going to continue the show. Take it away, Bruce.
Right, thanks very much, Ty. Yeah, guys, as I said, we spoke about the advantage. What do we use phosphates for? Well, obviously the fertilizer industry, but in the same breath, we're speaking about the disadvantages of the phosphates, and there is a rather large environmental issue. And it's got to do with over-fertilization and therefore the introduction of too many phosphates into the environment. So, what I've got here, what is the disadvantage? Well, here's that word that I asked you to think about. There it is. It introduces a problem called eutrophication. Okay, and I want to spend a little bit of time chatting about eutrophication. It's one of the very large environmental problems that phosphates are able to contribute to, and not only just phosphates, but the fertilizer industry in general. And we do suffer from this problem in this country, and when I chat about some of the examples, you'll probably be able to identify it with me. But first of all, where do we find eutrophication? What is the problem with eutrophication? And what I've got here is a little definition for a little bit of understanding of what we mean by eutrophication. Okay, it's an ecosystem response, okay, to the addition of artificial or natural substances such as nitrates and phosphates through fertilizers or sewage, okay, to an aquatic system, okay. Now, we're going to be talking specifically about nitrates and phosphates, okay? Nitrates and phosphates come from fertilizer. Phosphates is a big component of fertilizer. Now, very specifically, we are focusing on the aquatic system, okay? The problem we have affects our aquatic systems. Now, what actually happens is that when we actually have an oversupply, or should we say overuse of phosphorus, okay, of phosphates and nitrates when we talk about the fertilizer industry, is that the plants and the crops and all that sort of stuff cannot absorb everything that is given to them. So if they don't absorb it as part of their growth cycle, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is that the phosphates and nitrates are going to remain in the soil, okay. What will happen is that we have irrigation, or we have a natural rain system, and what will then happen is that the phosphates and nitrates will leach out of the soil. And I'm going to just go to a blank page over here, and I'm going to put up this word leach, or what we call leaching. Okay. Now, what that actually means is that when we have the ground like this, and we've got our phosphates, and I'll just put phosphates and represent it as PO3, PO43 minus, and nitrates, and I'll just put the nitrates in. I'm sure you guys are able to understand or know what we mean by nitrate. And what happens now is that if we start having rain, okay, so we have rainfall on the surface, okay, what actually happens is that the phosphates and nitrates leach out of the soil, okay? And what that means is that they now go down into the subterranean water systems, okay? So underneath, we have the subterranean water systems, like this, okay? So in go the phosphates, and in go the nitrates. Now, once we are in the subterranean water systems, okay, where do those subterranean water systems go? Well, they go into our rivers, okay, into our streams, into our rivers. And where do our rivers go? Well, our rivers often go into our dams. So what we actually end up getting, okay, let me just extend the page a little bit. Page doesn't want to extend. There we go. So what will happen is that here we have the high-lying areas like that. And we now have our water systems that come in like this from the hills, and they basically join up. And what happens is we now start getting our rivers, and our rivers start to flow. These rivers become absolutely saturated with phosphates and nitrates. Okay, and now they flow into a dam. Right. Guys, what happens now? You've got all these nutrients sitting in the water in a dam, okay? And dam water doesn't really move all that fast. So what actually happens is that we start to get a huge growth of algae within that dam itself, okay? Algae is one of the big ones, plus we start getting growth of a substance called a water hyacinth, okay? Okay, and we get algae. Okay, now these plants, algae is a little plant, it's a microscopic plant. These plants thrive in these conditions. So what actually happens is that the water now suddenly explodes with this extra amount of plant life in the water itself. Now if I go back to my original slide over here, we actually talk about it over there. We call it a blooming, okay? We have a blooming of algae and water hyacinth that actually takes place in these dams. Now, where's the problem? Right, negative environmental effects include hypoxia, the depletion of oxygen. So what happens now is that as all these water plants start to grow, the algae and the hyacinth, they extract the oxygen out of the water. Now, straight away, there's a problem, because if they're extracting all the oxygen out of the water, well, then your water-living animals, fish, crabs, things like that need water, they are going to be directly affected. You take away water from fish, they're going to suffocate. And what's going to happen now is that the actual animal life that's based in that particular body of water is going to die out. And what will happen is that you will find that dams and water systems that are severely affected by this eutrophication effect, you will find that dead fish keep on continuously washing up on the side of the rivers, on the side of the dam, and the life in the dam goes out. And that now becomes a massive problem, because we have now environmentally destroyed that area, that ecosystem, which was now in balance between all the plant life and the animal life that was there. This eutrophication now has created this blooming of all this plant life in the water, leads to hypoxia, the elimination of oxygen from the water, and away goes the animal life will die out. And that becomes really a serious, serious problem. So if you've seen pictures on television or in magazines or in books of waterways that appear very green and full of algae, well, then you know what the problem is. That is eutrophication. People who live close to Joburg can go up to Hartbeespoort, where they've actually had huge problems with water hyacinth, where they've got literally kilometers and kilometers of water hyacinths that have grown, and basically what's happened is that they have taken all the oxygen out of the water, plus another thing is that they block out the sun's rays. So not only is hypoxia a big problem, but also the removal of radiant energy, of sunlight from the sun. So therefore, what's going to happen is that life underneath that is now not getting any sunlight, that's going to die out. So at the end of the day, you get this terrible destruction of the environmental system that surrounds the waterways, and we really have to be very, very careful. So where does it all stem from? As I said earlier, the overuse of fertilizers. So the management of fertilizer that contain the phosphates, that contain nitrates, that management has to be absolutely crucial. Don't now, if you are adding fertilizer to any crops and things, don't just go and throw as much as you can down, expecting the crops to grow bigger and stronger and more healthily. They don't. They will only take up what they need. The rest will get leached. Let's not forget that little what I spoke about here, this leaching effect, where what will happen is that the rain will push the water, the nutrients down into the subterranean waterways. The subterranean waterways then basically go into our rivers, into our dams, and we now sit with this huge problem of eutrophication. And let's just make a little color effect. There's the green is the algification of that dam, and literally that dam, that little ecosystem has been killed. Big environmental problem. Ty, here a couple of questions are starting to come in.
Yes.
And let's see if we can answer a couple of questions quickly.
All right. So we have a question from Takalani, who's also a regular on say
Takalani, yeah, absolutely.
He wanted to find out, why are phosphates unsuitable for fertilizer?
Takalani, phosphates are not unsuitable for fertilizer. It's what I said earlier. It's the overuse that is unsuitable. Okay. Phosphates are an essential component for plant growth. Okay. You cannot have a healthy plant, and let's talk specifically crops. You cannot have crops that are going to produce healthy fruit, healthy vegetables, things like that, without having phosphates. Okay. The root system will absorb them, and they are essential for the strong, healthy growth and production of fruit and vegetables. Okay. However, as I said earlier, it's the abuse of the phosphates, where people just take fertilizer and they just throw it randomly without actually thinking. That's where the problem starts, because the overuse, you get the leaching and away into the water systems, and we have our eutrophication problems. Time?
Okay, so we have another question that came from Kelly. She wanted to find out, how important is phosphate in terms of as a plant nutrient?
Okay, I think I've sort of answered that already, but very important. Okay, remember when it comes to, and I'll just quickly talk a little bit over here about it. When it comes to fertilizers, and here's just a little bit of extra, we talk about an NPK ratio. Okay, now, a lot of you guys will probably recognize, well, especially the grade 12s will probably recognize this. So the grade 11s, you're going to come to it. So let's just talk about a little bit. We can spend a couple of minutes. The NPK ratio, if you look on any bag of fertilizer, okay, you will see now that they have a ratio of the nutrients. These are three main nutrients: nitrogen, okay, phosphorus, and potassium. Okay, nitrogen comes in the form of nitrates, phosphorus in the form of phosphates, and potassium comes in the form of the potassium cation. Okay, now all three of those are essential for our plant growth. Okay, and the ratio that you have is just depending on different amounts of nitrates, phosphates, and potassium. So when you go and have a look at a fertilizer bag, have a look at the NPK ratio, and you can actually find different NPK ratios depending on different soil types, and depending on how much nitrate do you need, how much phosphate do you need, and how much potassium do you need. Okay, so it is very essential, yes, for the plant growth. Okay, however, it's the overuse that causes the problem. Time?
Okay, so we have another question that came in also. Let me just get them all here. Okay, because there's actually been a lot that have been coming out. Takalani also wanted to find out, how do they use flotation to separate phosphate from other sediments?
Okay, that's quite an interesting technique, flotation. And what it does, they often use what they call froth flotation, froth like bubbles. Okay, and what they're able to do is when they extract it, they get the surface of the liquid, and they bubble it. They get bubbles, and what actually happens is that the superphosphate, okay, the superphosphate molecule, okay, the superphosphates. Sorry, let's just kill that. Okay, the superphosphate complex compound molecule that they produced after they've reacted the phosphorite with the sulfuric acid, that actually sticks to the bubbles. Okay, and what they're able to do is they're able to skim these bubbles off. They're able to skim them off. So what they're able to do is they skim them off, and these bubbles now are collected at the bottom, okay? And all the rest of the unnecessary and unwanted stuff remains in the solution, or if it's very dense, will sink down to the bottom. But the superphosphate complex is now basically held by those bubbles, okay, and it's skimmed off, and therefore it's basically extracted that way. Sure, there will be further purification processes that take place, but that's the main way how they're able to extract it. I think we've got time for one more before we take a break.
You should have one more.
Okay.
Then I have another one from Clarence. He wanted to find out which world event caused the start of South Africa's phosphate industry.
Which world event? That's a very good question. Okay. Basically, I think what happens is that, remember, in the sort of 18th and 19th century, the fertilizer industry, there wasn't artificial fertilizers. It was actually used, it was natural fertilizers, guano, okay, which was basically bird droppings. Okay, and what actually happened was that on these islands where you've got these millions of nesting birds, bird droppings accumulated over hundreds and thousands of years, and therefore there was a massive amount of natural fertilizer. Okay, now what happened is that with extensive mining, extensive removal of that guano from these islands, okay, the fertilizer industry started running short. So what they had to do, they had to start making fertilizer, and they had to try and find sources to make the artificial fertilizer. And if they're going to find phosphates, where do they find them? Well, they find them in phosphorite. And obviously, our geologists identified a large amount of phosphorite, and that's probably, hopefully, that's the answer where our mining actually started.
Okay. Well, I think we should take a quick break.
Let's take a quick break. And
Right.
we'll come back and I'm going to have a look at some energy resources afterwards.
Okay, no problem. So on that note, Mindsetters, please get your questions in. Post. And guys, I just want to say thank you for joining us, but make sure you come back after this break. We'll see you soon.